Britain's new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, was greeted by anti-Brexit protesters today while visiting a police training centre in central England. This week, Johnson took over the reins from Theresa May, promising to leave the European Union by October 31st with or without a Brexit deal. If the latter happens and Britain crashes out of the EU, economists have warned that the consequences could be devastating and far-reaching. Britain is Canada's largest export market in the EU. So how could Johnson's approach to trade affect Canada? Rona Ambrose is the former interim leader of the Conservative Party and a current member of the Nafta Advisory Council to Minister of Foreign Affairs Chrystia Freeland. She joins us from Calgary. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ms. Ambrose. I want to jump right in and ask, Boris Johnson is the new British Prime Minister. What does it mean for Canada?
Well, he's a charismatic, popular guy in Britain, although it seems to be one of those love-hate things with him. But he's a known commodity, which is helpful to Canada. He was a foreign secretary for a while, so the Canadian government knows him in that role. And he's been around politics for quite some time. People know him to be an economic liberal and a social liberal. They know that he wants to lower taxes. He wants to bring investment to Britain, but they also know that he is very comfortable with a no deal on Brexit. So for the first time, the UK looks like they have a little bit of leverage over the EU in terms of his very clear support for a no deal Brexit on October 31st. And of course, Canada and the UK were actually working behind the scenes on a trade agreement that would supplant their existing deal post-Brexit. But there's no point in Canada striking a deal with the UK at this point when the new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is saying there's going to be what's called a no-deal Brexit, which means there will be pretty much all tariffs lifted coming into the United Kingdom. So Canada could probably get a better deal, let's put it that way, if they wait till after Brexit. So I'm assuming that for Canada, we'll wait and see what happens post-Brexit and then go from there.
Canadian companies that are going to be watching this unfold, and there's a lot of anxiety because there's uncertainty, and that is never good for anyone trying to plan business. What advice do you have to them to navigate this uncertainty?
Well, we've been going through this for a couple of years with the USMCA and the new Nafta. And let's face it, it's almost the new normal around the world, this level of protectionism and nationalism we're seeing. I guess the good thing about Boris Johnson as PM is we know that he is a free trader. We do know that he doesn't like tariffs. We do know that he's not a protectionist when it comes to economic policy, unlike Trump. So that's a positive thing. And we hope that post-Brexit, which will be after October 31st, he's saying do or die, we'll see what happens, that there will be a lot less tariffs. So hopefully that's good for Canadian businesses. But you're right, any amount of uncertainty is bad. I think if he can get this finalized or come to a resolution October 31st, that will be helpful to business. We don't know what that will look like, but I do think the uncertainty weighs on a lot, not only on the markets, but weighs on everyday consumers, and it weighs on those small businesses just trying to do business in the UK.
Now, have you been approached by the new British PM or anyone on his team to help negotiate the divorce deal with the EU?
No, not yet.
Not yet, but do you expect to be approached?
No, I don't think so. But obviously, I would offer my support. I was approached by Jeremy Hunt, who is his running mate, to work on this. Canada actually has an incredible reputation when it comes to trade agreements. And the reality is, because the UK hadn't actually struck a trade deal for 40 years, they literally had to create a trade office and a trade department from scratch practically. So there was a lot of Canadians and others going to the UK, giving advice, offering support. They've slowly built up a trade department, but they still don't have a lot of expertise. So there has been people that have reached out and asked for support from different countries. And Canada is very well respected because, as you know, whether it's conservative governments or liberal governments, we have struck a lot of successful trade deals.
Another trade deal, as you mentioned, of course, is the new Nafta. And in the U.S., the Democrats are pushing to reopen the new agreement around a couple of issues, but particularly one that is really easy to understand is finding ways to lower drug prices. Canada has said its official position is that it is not willing to reopen the new Nafta. They've got it on paper. They want to take it and sign it and get that ratified. But do you think Canada should be open to the idea of changing a deal?
Well, I mean, I think we have to watch this play out in the U.S. We have obviously already signed the agreement. It hasn't ratified through our parliament yet. As you know, Mexico has ratified it through their parliament. Congress is now, it looks like the House of Representatives will rise for the summer break, so the USMCA is not going to go through until the fall. But the Democrats, it wouldn't make a lot of sense for the Democrats to not support the USMCA. Let's remember a lot of the things that are in the USMCA, particularly the environment and labor provisions, are things that they've been asking for as a party for many years to be put into the Nafta. So whether it's the fact that more cars will be built in the United States, more content, more American content, more American aluminum and steel content, the International Labor Organization's provisions are in the core of the USMCA, which is different than NAFTA. NAFTA doesn't have environment and labor provisions in the core. It has it as side agreements. Now, this could, one way that we could look at doing something, if there was some kind of an amendment that Canada was amenable to, and the US and Mexico, let's say it's around drug prices. I don't know if that's the case that it'll happen. There might be the opportunity for a side letter or what's called a side agreement. That doesn't change the core agreement, and it's much easier to manage and to do. So maybe something like that would happen, but I think we have to let the political process play out in the United States between the Republicans and the Democrats, and not insert ourselves into that.
You mentioned the environment and you mentioned the labor standards. Those are two of the things that have been labeled by the party that you used to lead as things that the Liberals are trying to put into NAFTA to try and, to virtue signal. It's been criticized by Aaron O'Toole, who is the foreign affairs critic. And really, the Conservatives have attacked the Liberals on those planks that they pushed for in this deal that you just mentioned the Democrats like. What do you make of the criticism coming from the Conservatives around that aspect of NAFTA?
Well, I think when you're opposition, you look for different points that you may not agree with. I think also potentially the labor and environment provisions early on might have looked like something that all parties wouldn't support. But what we've seen happen is, in fact, all parties around the table do support them, and they are the provisions that are in line with the International Labor Organization international standards, which is something that all most agreements around the world are based on, at least in Western countries, including in Canada. So these are things we're familiar with. Our unions are familiar with them. Unions in Mexico, the United States, and Canada support them. Where there's a gap is the United States, frankly. These labor provisions and environment provisions go farther than I think any of us expected the Americans, particularly a Trump administration, to go. So that's why I say it's interesting, because the Democrats are in a bit of a pickle, because these are things that they've supported for a long time, especially around the environment and labor. And yet, of course, they don't really want to hand a win or a victory to President Trump on these issues. But a lot of their supporters, including union members and workers, are pushing the Democrats very vocally and publicly to get on with the USMCA and pass it and ratify it, because they know it is good for workers in the end.
Really quickly, the last thing I want to ask you, given the political calendar with the American summer break coming up now, the Canadian election in the fall, and then the 2020 election in the U.S., are you worried that the new NAFTA could get lost in the shuffle?
I don't think so. It is extremely important, especially for the Americans, because we've seen studies come out just recently on the benefits to the United States. I think Trump wants to get this thing done. It's important to him, so he will be pushing it in the fall. And of course, it's already been ratified through Parliament in Mexico. And I would hope that here in Canada, we want to get to a resolution on this as quickly as possible. Look, there has been so much uncertainty on this file for business. It has an impact. We know from looking at numbers that trade uncertainty affects competitiveness. It affects people, CEOs' decisions on whether to invest or not in their companies, whether to hire or not. We need to put this to bed, and it's important for the country to do that. And I think our Prime Minister and Donald Trump, the president, of course, the president in Mexico, all agree on that. So I would hope, even if we're in the middle, close to an election, that the Liberal government will actually recall Parliament and get this thing ratified as quickly as possible. It's that important. I mean, unless we're pushing into the election calendar and we can wait for a new government. But look, this uncertainty is not helpful to the economy. So I think the sooner we can get this thing done, the better.
Ms. Ambrose, thank you for your time today.
Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.